My name is Marcus Webb, and for 10 years, my life has been by any honest measure a good one. My wife Claire and I met in our late 20s at a mutual friend's dinner party, fell into easy conversation over terrible wine and excellent cheese, and discovered over the following months that we fit together in the quiet, sturdy way that actually lasts. Not the fireworks kind of love that burns bright and fast, but the slow, warm kind. The kind that shows up on a Tuesday morning when one of you has a bad headache and the other makes tea without being asked. We chose early on not to have children. It was a mutual decision, arrived at through honest conversation rather than circumstance, and it freed us both to invest completely in our careers and in each other. Claire has flourished professionally in ways that genuinely take my breath away. She has become a recognized authority in her field, sought after, celebrated, constantly in demand. I watch her and feel a pride so pure, it almost embarrasses me. My own work, financial analysis, at a mid-sized consulting firm is steadier than spectacular. The days follow each other in orderly succession. Numbers. Spreadsheets. Client calls that tend to blend into a single continuous hum by Thursday afternoon. It is not the stuff of great autobiography, but it is mine, and it pays well, and I have learned to find small satisfactions in the discipline it requires. We live in a 2-story house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, the kind of street where people still wave from their driveways. Inside, our home reflects the particular aesthetic that emerged naturally from combining our tastes, contemporary art pieces alongside antique furniture that we've collected slowly over years of weekend market browsing. It is a space that feels unmistakably like us. Our evenings are largely quiet. Dinner, conversation, sometimes a film, often just the particular comfortable silence that only comes after a decade of genuine intimacy. It is a life that most people, looking in from outside, would call enviable.
And it was. It is.
It simply turned out to also be the prologue to something neither of us had seen coming. It started as the genuinely interesting things tend to completely by accident. A Sunday afternoon. A visiting exhibition at the City Museum on the history of medieval social customs. Claire had wanted to go for weeks. I'd agreed with the mild enthusiasm of a husband who knows that agreeable attendance at cultural events is its own form of love language. We moved through the galleries unhurriedly, and then we arrived at a case I hadn't expected. Historical chastity devices. The exhibition card explained their origins, their social context, the myths surrounding their use. Most visitors moved past with a quick glance and a slightly uncomfortable laugh. I stood there for much longer than felt entirely normal. Something about the objects, their craftsmanship, their symbolism, the layered psychology embedded in their very existence reached into a part of my mind that I hadn't known was listening. I said nothing to Claire at the time, but I thought about them for days afterward. It was the kind of thought that doesn't announce itself loudly. It sits quietly in the corner of your consciousness, patient and persistent, and you find yourself returning to it at odd moments in the middle of a spreadsheet, waiting for coffee to brew, lying awake in the particular dark of 3 in the morning. Finally, on a Thursday evening as Claire and I sat in the living room with the soft lamp glow and the comfortable weight of our familiar routine around us, I heard myself speaking. "There's something I want to talk about," I said. And then I told her. All of it. The museum. The thoughts I'd been circling. The strange, specific pull of the idea that I couldn't fully explain, but couldn't put down either. I watched her face as I spoke. She didn't recoil. She didn't laugh. She didn't offer the quick, practiced reassurance of someone trying to make an awkward moment pass. She leaned in. Her expression was one of genuine, open curiosity, the same face she makes when she's reading something that's genuinely surprised her in an interesting way. "Tell me more," she said. With Claire's encouragement, which was warm and real and completely without performance, I ordered a male chastity device. I won't pretend the package arrived without anxiety. I held it for a long time before opening it, sitting on the edge of our bed in the afternoon light, running my thumb over the packaging with the particular feeling of someone standing at the edge of something new and not entirely sure how deep the water is. The first time I wore it, the sensation was profoundly strange. Strange and unexpectedly, undeniably thrilling. not in a way I could have predicted or explained in advance. It was less physical than psychological, a shift in the internal landscape, a rearrangement of something I hadn't known needed rearranging. As though some equation inside me that had always been slightly off balance had quietly corrected itself. Claire and I navigated this new terrain together with a combination of careful communication and genuine playfulness. We talked about everything, about what it meant to us, about what we wanted to explore, about where the edges of our comfort lay. We laughed sometimes at the awkwardness and the novelty of it. We were tender with each other. It wasn't a departure from our intimacy. It was a deepening of it. Each conversation, each new experience, each shared vulnerability added another layer to the trust we had been building for 10 years. We were not changing what we were to each other. We were discovering what else we could be. The evening we met Diana and Sophia was not the evening I expected to have. It was a social gathering at the home of a colleague, the kind of gathering that usually delivers pleasant small talk and forgettable canapes. But Diana and Sophia were not usual in any sense. Diana was tall, composed, with the specific bearing of someone who has made their peace with exactly who they are and no longer requires the world's input on the subject. Sophia was warmer in her presentation, quicker to laugh, more immediately expressive, but no less certain of herself. We discovered over the course of an evening that stretched well past its expected end, a couple who had been living within the particular lifestyle that Claire and I were only beginning to explore. Not performatively, not as a statement or an identity to be declared, but practically, daily, as simply the shape their relationship had naturally grown into over years. Their conversation was extraordinary. They spoke about trust, how it is not the precondition for this kind of exploration, but the product of it. About vulnerability as a form of strength rather than its opposite. About the specific intimacy that comes from knowing someone will hold what you give them carefully. I found myself leaning forward in my chair, barely touching my drink. Something in their words reached precisely the place I had been circling without knowing its name. By the time we said our goodbyes, well after midnight, something had shifted. Diana pressed her card into my hand as we left. "Call us," she said simply. "When you're ready." We called. Under Diana and Sophia's guidance, I was introduced to a custom-made chastity belt, not the mass-produced device I had started with, but a precisely crafted piece of craftsmanship that spoke to a different level of commitment. Not just to the physical reality of restraint, but to what the restraint represented. A choice. A surrender. A trust placed deliberately, consciously in the hands of another. Claire held the key. And something in that simple, symbolic fact opened a door I hadn't known was there. Under her guidance, gentle, sure, and suffused with a love that made every step feel safe, and with the steady mentorship of Diana and Sophia, I began to explore what had been stirring at the edges of my consciousness for far longer than I had admitted to myself. A feminized identity. Not as a costume. Not as a game. As an authentic exploration of something that felt less like a discovery and more like a recognition, like returning to a room you've been in before, but seeing it properly lit for the first time. My wife is, among her many extraordinary qualities, an exceptional observer of people. She had, I think, seen this part of me before I had seen it myself. She guided the process with a patience and a specificity that still moves me when I think about it, not pushing, never forcing, but creating the conditions in which the exploration could happen naturally and at my own pace. She took me shopping. We went together, on a quiet weekday afternoon, to stores I had never entered as myself. Dresses, lingerie, soft blouses in fabrics I had never worn. Claire moved through the racks with the assurance of a woman who knows what she's looking for, occasionally holding something up against me with an evaluative expression and a small smile. "This one," she'd say. Or, "Not this. Try this instead." Each piece I brought home felt like a small, significant act of self-definition. The makeup came next, a slower education, conducted in front of our bathroom mirror with Claire seated on the edge of the counter offering instruction and encouragement and occasional gentle corrections. Foundation. Blusher. The surprisingly difficult art of eyeliner applied steadily. I was clumsy at first. Then less so. Then gradually beginning to understand. Each session ended with me looking at a reflection that felt less like performance and more like truth, like the static clearing on a signal that had always been there, just obscured. Claire would look at my reflection over my shoulder and say, quietly, "There she is." Stepping out into the world dressed in feminine attire for the first time was an experience I am not sure I have adequate language for. Every nerve was alert. Every sense was heightened. I was aware, with an almost painful acuity, of everything: the weight of fabric, the sound of my own footsteps, the direction of every glance in my vicinity. Some glances lingered. Some people whispered to the person beside them. Once or twice I caught an expression not hostile, but distinctly curious, that made the back of my neck warm with self-consciousness. And I kept walking, because behind the self-consciousness, behind the awareness of every gaze, there was something else, something quieter and more persistent and ultimately more powerful. The feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. Not the version of me that sat in office meetings discussing quarterly projections. Not the version that nodded along at neighborhood gatherings making conversation about house prices. This version. This embodied, present, authentically expressed version. The discomfort of public visibility was real. But it was surface-level discomfort, the discomfort of being seen. And beneath it was a deep, unfamiliar calm that I eventually recognized as relief. The relief of no longer hiding, even imperfectly, even with the whole world still finding its way to understanding. Something shifted between Claire and me as the transformation deepened. Not in the love that remained exactly what it had always been, warm and steady and entirely reliable, but in the shape of the relationship, the architecture of it. Claire stepped into a new role with the quiet assurance of someone who had perhaps always been moving toward it. She became not just my wife, but my guide, leading our dynamic with a combination of authority and tenderness that I found, unexpectedly, to be exactly what I had been reaching toward without the vocabulary to name it. Her confidence grew alongside mine. Her pleasure in the dynamic was genuine and unmistakable, and watching her flourish in it was its own extraordinary gift. We talked more honestly than we had ever talked before, which is saying something, given that our marriage had always been built on communication. But this was a different order of honesty. The kind that requires you to say things you have never said aloud, to hold up the most hidden corners of yourself to the light, and trust that what is looking back at you will not turn away. Claire never turned away. She looked and she understood and she stayed. Our intimacy deepened in direct proportion to the depth of our honesty. Each conversation that required courage was repaid with closeness. Each vulnerability offered was met with care. The trust we had built over a decade turned out to be precisely the foundation this new architecture required. One quiet evening, unremarkable in every external way, the kind of evening that slips past without announcing itself, as significant, I stood before our bedroom mirror in the soft evening light. I was dressed as I had been dressing for months now. Familiar fabrics. Familiar lines. The scent of the perfume Claire had chosen for me on a shopping afternoon months ago. I looked at my reflection. And something happened that is difficult to describe without sounding either dramatic or insufficient. I simply recognized myself. Not the gradual, uncertain recognition of someone still finding their footing. The full, settled recognition of arrival, of homecoming, of having spent a long time navigating by partial maps and finally seeing the whole territory laid out clearly. The person in the mirror was not Marcus performing a role. She was Mara, a name that had arrived quietly and without fanfare, suggested by Claire one afternoon and received by me with the immediate sense of rightness that only true names carry. She was me. She had, I understood, standing there, always been me. I was simply finally in a place in a relationship, in a life, in a marriage built on 10 years of genuine love and sustained by the extraordinary grace of a woman who had chosen to take this journey beside me, where I had the safety to see her clearly. I smiled at my reflection. She smiled back. There is a moment from recently that I return to often. A gathering at the home of friends Diana and Sophia, as it happens. A small group of people who know us, who know Mara, who receive her, simply and without ceremony, as the person who walks through their door. Claire and I arrived together. Stood together in that warm, lamplit room, surrounded by voices and laughter and the particular ease of being among people who see you clearly and love what they see. At some point in the evening, Claire caught my eye across the room. There were no words exchanged.
There didn't need to be.
Her expression said everything: the quiet pride, the deep affection, the shared acknowledgement of a journey taken together and still continuing, of a love that had grown stranger and deeper and more honest than either of us had known to hope for on that first evening over terrible wine and excellent cheese. I am Marcus Webb in the world that requires that name. And I am Mara in the world that knows me fully. Both are real. Both are mine. Neither is more true than the other. What is most true, beyond all names and all roles and all the beautifully complicated architecture of who we have become to each other, is this: we are two people who chose each other a decade ago and who choose each other still, every single day. And that underneath everything else is the whole story. The bravest thing is not the transformation. It is the trust that makes the transformation possible.